Welcome and thank you for tuning into NeptuneKnives. We appreciate your ongoing support, and thought it'd be nice to mention a couple individuals. Enduring Eagle and PMing me a link to get me a free video editing software to remove that watermark, because a lot of individuals have mentioned that they love my vids, but they don't like the watermarks. And then also Senior Jobin and Defense and Safety, and along with Tough Thumbs, they all three have mentioned our channel and have said some very nice comments about us, and we greatly appreciate that. And also to Pavlov Sandor, his video entry into our contest, we greatly appreciate that too. He has one specific video that is one of my personal favorites. It's an anniversary gift for Pavlov. It had his wife, Pavlov's wife, Tripod, had bought Pavlov 2 Spydercos for his anniversary present, and that is probably, if you haven't seen it, that is probably one of the nicest, like, heartwarming videos you'll ever see on YouTube. Now, I had gotten a couple requests by individuals to review knives that perhaps weren't always in such the high bracket price range. You know, I want to say that when I make these reviews, I realize that there is perhaps a knife that people who are viewers who are watching specifically like, that I might be critiquing. But the thing is, just bear in mind that you know, if you like the knife, I'm not telling you you can't like it. I'm just telling you to be careful. So with that in mind now, when you start to look at more affordable folding knives, that in itself creates a kind of dilemma, because you're looking for a deal. But if you know, if you live here in the United States, you get what you pay for, and in other words, you don't get unless you pay for it. So there's a reality to, you know, if you want a small folder to be reliable, perhaps you might want to consider a small fixed blade, because then you're going to have all that manufacturing quality and value go into the design, into the materials used, rather than, you know, having it go into labor to create mechanisms and stuff like that. But, you know, that's not always realistic, and there are quite a few folders out there that are pretty decent. And for example, there's some by Inland. Senior Jobin sells some of those, so go check them out. And also there's these Spydercos that are made in China, and they're not the ones that are made in Taichung, Taiwan, like the Sage ones. That are a little much more pricey actually. We're talking now Spydercos specifically. Their value folder lines: the Tenacious, Persistence, Resilience, and Ambitious. I had a chance to look at all 4 versions, and I can say right off the bat, here's all 4 versions. I suggest against all 3 of the larger ones. First reason is, okay, and this should be logical to anyone who you know, if you're logical, you understand what I'm about to say. If you're gonna get a liner lock that's not very expensive, then you should consider it should have a choil in case it disengages, because it's a folding knife that's not expensive. So bear in mind then that these 3 here all can cut your finger if they unlock. Second problem with them is all 3 of their liners are long lock bars. And if you had watched my previous video on locking mechanisms, those long lock bars are just asking to be disengaged. They're smooth, you know, but they also can unlock. Plus, there is a cutout that makes it slightly possible for you to disengage it, especially even on this bigger one, because your finger goes right into that space. So, based upon that, I opted to get the Ambitious, which is the only one I feel personally is safe to use, and so that's the knife I'm going to review. Now, first thing to mention, if it does unlock on you, there is that right there. Let's say hypothetically this is for your daughter or something, and you know she loses all her knives all the time, but you want her to have one, and you know she makes the mistake of not locking it, you know, because you're not really a knife person. Second thing is, this lock bar is very short, so it's actually very angled, and if you've been following, it's a very, in fact, that's the first thing you notice about this one is a much stiffer action. It's stiff to open and stiff to unlock, and you know, it's got a really strong spring tension and a really strong detent because of that, and that constant pressure is always pushing on the blade. But that's the good thing, because you want this small knife to not unlock on you. And so you got this really nice short lock bar with a strong spring tension, and then that. Plus, when you hold it, you're not actually touching that area, if you see. So that makes it helpful if you do motions like this. There's actually, that gap actually goes in between your fingers. So there's much less chance of disengaging it. And if you ever held a PT, though this design is short, because it's so short and stubby right here, it actually can sit into your palm. So in terms of any pushing, you know, I say penetration cutting, you don't have to worry about it sliding around. So it actually makes it pretty darn good. So you look at like value. Okay, now first of all, just because it's not made in the United States, and just because it's a very affordable price, does not mean it's cheap. First of all, some people list this. Let's say this knife was $35. Okay, the knife being made in China, a lot of people don't know, but the minimum wage in China is $204 a month, or $2 an hour if you live in the capital of China, Beijing, and that has the highest paying minimum wage. So if you consider that and divide that into this cost, if it was just purely that, we were saying 17.5 hours could have possibly gone into making this knife, if you didn't include the cost of the materials and things like that. You know, so that doesn't mean just because it's made in China that it's not good quality. It just means the labor is very, very low, and also it uses 8CR13 MOV steel, which is now not so much of a steel that's in demand, so it's more affordable to get that steel to make this knife. So to go over the steel, now 8CR is comparable to AUS 8, and some people will complain that AUS 8 tends to rust on them. Well, see, okay, the 8 is for the carbon in it. It's 0.8. And then you have CRs for chromium, 13%. That's where the 13 comes from. The bare minimum for a knife to be considered stainless steel is 12%. So if you're using knives that have a high percentage chromium, you're used to that sort of resistance to corrosion or rust, then yes, this is kind of scraping the bottom. And depending on what you use it for, where you live, and how much hot heat there is and sweat, and some people are saying this is a great knife to put on you when you go for a jog, or if you're playing basketball. Bear in mind then that the steel is stainless, but just right there at that level. Then the MO is for molybdenum and the V is for vanadium. The difference between these two is specifically just between AUS 8 and this is it has just slightly more carbon and small, I mean we're talking 0.1% of molybdenum and vanadium. So basically it's just a stainless steel with 13% chromium, a little bit of carbon, and practically nothing else. So therefore, because it's low alloys, it's pretty tough. It tends to roll, of course, rather than chip. And the Rockwell hardness, compared to AUS 8, AUS 8's Rockwell hardness can range between 57 to 59. This one is 58 to 59. And if you had any experience with Spydercos, I used to do business with a custom knife maker that he did like modifications to knives, and he knew that Spydercos always aims for that edge retention, so always pushes the Rockwell hardness pretty high. So you can guess right here that this is somewhere around 58.5. If it's 58 to 59, at least it's 58.5, if not 59 Rockwell hardness. But without the vanadium in it, you got pretty easy to sharpen. This being just a small, compact little folder, I don't never really care. I mean, as long as it cuts, if you have to sharpen it, it's easy to lose its edge, it's easy to sharpen. I mean, if it kept its edge really well, but it was really hard to sharpen, I mean, that's a trade-off. So what's the really difference? Either you spend more time sharpening, because it's hard to get that edge back, or you just touch it up every once in a while, when you have to do that more often. So I've heard some viewers saying that the screws are not that great. Now, if you know anything from my videos, I'm big on that. I always am talking about the quality of screws, and he had said that the screws tend to strip. I have taken this knife apart, and for me, actually, it's fine. I didn't see any problem with it. I made a couple mistakes just because I was being lazy, and I just wanted to see how good it is. And there's not a single, you can't even tell. These screws are Allen style, but they go deep in. And so I've noticed that if you just make sure your tool is pushed all the way in, and you're just careful about it, regardless, again, for the price, hey, it's fine. I would say the screws are pretty darn decent. I mean, they're good. They're much more beyond, way beyond Boker's China-made stuff. Look at the thickness of the liner lock. It's actually the same thickness of the Valaton. We're talking the Valaton is supposed to be this overbuilt Spyderco that's got this 4mm somewhat Tonto, modified Tonto blade, and you got this little tiny Ambitious with the same thickness liner lock, which is great because if you follow that previous video of the best locking mechanism, in it we discussed that if a lock had a 0.08 inches thick liner, it could withstand sometimes up to 130 pounds of force. This one is pretty darn decent. And interesting too, so if you look at the back of that blade tang, see that long portion on this side, the lock bar actually meets flush with almost more than half of that space. You can tell right here. And if you hadn't followed my last video, the one about the frame locks and comparisons about the Sebenza, in a Strider frequently asked question interview, Mika talked about that the reason why there's only a portion that touches on over here on the lock bar is because you want it to be as far away from the pivot as possible, so that it pushes down instead of possibly disengaging the lock. The force goes down. So in this one, the lock engages half of that space right over here. That bottom half of that distance. The pivot is shouldered, and so are the stop pin, which is actually just a pin, but shouldered, along with the spacers. Even this back spacer too, but shouldered. But only the stop pin is notched and slotted so that if you were to unscrew it, the other side won't keep turning. The rest of them you're going to have to try to kind of fidget with, maybe tighten one side down first, and then slowly start to untighten the other side. Now, considering the knife for tactical uses, that is something I would not recommend. Because even though you can add a little wave mod and wave it, people may not know that my very first knife was a Sebenza, and originally Mel's first knife was a Dragonfly. Our very first knives, we were looking for a compact, and Mel being a girl, we wanted something small, and that's where most of our focus originally started on. And so we're very familiar with the various options of small knives that are available. And the point is, being that it's a small knife, in a tactical situation, it's harder to manipulate the blade quickly and get your hand into position, and there's lots of room for error, especially when there's not lots of safety features such as a flipper or a deep choil like on the Subcom. And so in this instance, if it were not to open completely, it's very risky because there's only that somewhat version of a finger guard, and if you just keep pushing too far down, it'll start to slice. So I mean, it's definitely something that I would suggest only use for practical use. I mean, you can still flick it open for sure, Consider using this knife as a practical knife tool and nothing more because of that aspect. And yes, correct, the G10's not very functional. It's just for looks. The pattern is too small and shallow for it to really catch anything. It's quite impressive actually. This overall fit and finish is pretty decent. Mine didn't come centered, but the other one that I've seen are centered. The ones I have in stock now, because I like the knife, is centered. And once I took this apart and put it back together, back to center. The washers are phosphor bronze, but they're very thin, like almost paper thin. And in fact, there's actually 4 washers, 2 on each side. So to note, one thing about owning this knife is, well, handy is you can just drop oil right in there. So you don't really have to take it apart ever. But the washers, when I've seen washers that thin, what happens is, okay, if you watch my Dragonfly video, when a part of the washers are exposed, they can get caught on the blade shape, and it can tear the washer, like almost peel the washer apart. So bear in mind, with thin washers, what I'm trying to get at is, don't tighten this pivot down too much. I mean, if you're someone who likes that tension, just accept a little bit more of looseness, perhaps even, there's no blade play. You can sense movement, but it's not like an actual sudden movement. It's just kind of a bendingness, just I think because of the stability of the knife. But regardless, you want to consider leaving that a little bit loose, because if you do over tighten it, it's going to constantly scrape on those paper thin washers and cause them to damage. And I'm not saying have blade play, but just keep it leaning towards that loose. I hope that this helps some of the individuals who follow my channel that do like more affordable knives, this is a good one.